meetings. So,
Oh, okay. We can vote if Kathy and Laura. We can if
We
they.
get 2 more.
yeah, we need to.
Well, we'll get. Are you good, Trish?
No, still doing it. And you're live.
Somebody.
Oh, you saved me a space? I didn't even know. I just.
We will call the meeting to order at 8:05. Not have a more yet, but if one more join us, we will. Emily is joining us for anyone who didn't hear. Or what did you say?
Yeah.
I was like, can I have your name? I'm sorry. Thanks for joining us. We don't have a quorum, we can't vote on anything, but we can have a meeting and push everything that needs to be put on to the next. Well, Kathy's not here. Do you want to do anything?
The Audit and Finance Committee met on February 10th. We had a quorum, members were there, and we reviewed policy number 25, which is an online posting policy. Right. That's a new policy that has an impact on the financials and how they get posted online. So that was reviewed thoroughly by the Audit and Finance Committee and actually the government. Because we created a new policy that kind of helped the FOIL policy, which we're doing the FOIL policy, and so that policy as well. And then, as is our annual for annual procedure, we reviewed the effectiveness of the internal control. So all of those were approved to advance the board.
So let's just make sure everybody knows what's happening in this policy. The goal here, I want to be really overt about it. I talked to the county about it. Our goal is to reduce the exposure easily put together around individual transactions or things that could easily be avoided. So we have a very limited number of vendors, a very limited number of expenditures. So what we're trying not to do is to get information or possibly to triangulate on those things, but just looking at what we publicly provide. So summary information will always be what we post. Detailed information will be reviewed by the Finance Committee. Members of the public continue to access that by either participating in those forums or by FOIL, which is why we looked at the FOIL policy to ensure that it was current and sensible. I made sure our auditors know about this, but the interesting thing about the auditors team is that they started the conversation. They wanted to immediately know what things we were doing in light of things that had occurred in our area of Lake. And they had no objection to our approach. Now, obviously, they don't report to the ABO. And I think there is some potential that we would get some kind of feedback, whether it's a finding or not. And to be honest, I welcome it. We've got to figure out how to get into this space, balance the needs for transparency with the exposure of public organizations. And I don't want to surprise it. Board. We're not trying to hide anything from somebody, but we are trying not to sit idly by as what happened to the county could easily happen here. Maybe not so easily because our other processes are slightly different, but the ability to gather the information is just as readily available the way we were doing. Our organization and organizations like us are targeted because we're small, but we have relatively meaningful. You've got $1 million and you're run by a single digit number of people, you're automatically on the list. The we will continue to work with our banking partners and board members who have expertise in this area, and we take input from best practices here. But we are probably at the tip of the spear of making changes based on things that are occurring here. I don't think that's a problem. Really. But anybody who has any thoughts about it, well, it's probably going to be something that involves continually.
So this is what the financials used to look like. And that's what you have in your packet, is what they look like. Very summarized. As Jim said, so for the fourth policy, we will not, this is the sort of more expanded. You're welcome to request it. I'm not going to ready to there. You're also, we can go through the financials, and I mean, I will present more detailed financials to you for meetings. And then if somebody wants to request more detailed financials, they're welcome to them. They can pick them up, or they can be mailed to them, but we will not be them sign on those over so they want to get this.
There was a statewide economic development conference in Albany about 2 years ago, and I don't know if you went. I didn't go, but I was in Albany that day, and I understand that this was a topic there. Again, it's a conference. Lots of people from the EDO are reporting it, but the people that have their organization.
So we belong to the New York State Economic Council. And typically we do go to forums. There was a reason none of us go that. I think Jeff. Yeah. But everyone is dealing with it in different ways. We're probably out front of most people in almost an immediate policy change. And I think there's interest from our peers. I talked about it with all the rest of the area economic development organization. We were literally ahead of them, and they're interested to see what happens. I told to the county, I said, you guys have to go through whatever process that you're going through, but hopefully we can at least give you some clear a little bit of ground in terms of what policy envelope you could step into once you come up with more full investigation as to what you're doing. Right now, the risk of public access is on the wrong side of that balance, because we've had not only $1 million worth of losses, but it affects the organization. But Dr. John, every budget item in the county is stressed right now, and that's going to affect our expenditure, our allocation from the county. The ability for the county to address some of their financial concerns in terms of raising sales tax that they've talked about, other things, is going to consume a lot of their energy. So he's interested and wants to see how the state reacts to this. It's not defiant. We're trying to do whatever we do. Engaging our attorneys and engaging all organizations. We're not trying to do this quietly. We're trying to see where is the right place to land. I believe this is the right place to do. I think essentially what it will mean for you is that the audit and finance group, which already scrutinizes long and healthy meetings, will be the place where most of this is functioned in a very detailed way. And in the past, members of the board have sometimes come up, even if they're not a member of that committee. And I think that's another opportunity for anybody who wants to go deep on financials, because that's what we're always going to be doing.
You can also reach out.
Foil policy is just to make sure that the only changes there are to make sure that we're consistent with the other policy. So if there's a process by which somebody can request things and we clarify what is a legitimate request, a question is not, but a request for records is a legitimate request. So there's better language to explain that. You can't say what are the various expenditures for the last month, but you can ask for last month's financial. And that's the clarity was, you know.
Yeah, that's the item of the policy, it's just that paragraph of that. And otherwise, it's all the same language, it's, we actually went by paper. The financial statement is a policy.
Yeah.
Especially got the summary.
Yeah.
It's safe, I log in.
Yeah, Sue is not here.
So we met on February 11th. Really, question covered 6 matters of business. First matter of business was appointments of a new member of the executive committee, Jim and Melanie Fuller. We agreed part of the committee, so we made a motion to forward that to the board, appoint to the executive committee. We had a review and discussion of the board seats later this year. There are 3. Sue besides herself expired and reached out to the other 2. We made the motion to advance reappoint for Sue and Ashley. Third matter of business was review and provision discussion of the employee handbook. This is specific to the 60-day waiting period for health insurance for eligible employees, plus the addition of dental. Discussion on board composition. I think Jim's talked with Kathy, who has indicated looking to step down in 2026 at some point from the chair and of the committee and treasurer. So Sue and herself will start a process of reaching out to folks to see who can fill that role. We also discussed policy 23 and 25. These are the 2 policies we just discussed. And we worked to advance those 2 policies for approval of the board. And then the last thing we covered was just some Jim thoughts on the rate or tier structure for membership for the 2027 membership drive, which I think we'll have more discussions in the upcoming months on.
The handbook stuff is pressing because we're actually hiring somebody to replace our who's going to be departed coordinator here. And so we needed to get clarity on that to make sure that what we can, any new employee is current and flexible policy. So what I'm hoping is that some way we can get that we actually that position's posted now. We haven't begun the interviews. I think we probably got somewhere between 5 and 10 candidates already applied, but I would imagine something like the next one.
It's you need it before our next board meeting. Can you do it?
Yeah, I'll look at that if we need to. I mean, the other thing we can do is to make sure that they're aware of both iterations of this, the previous one, the ones that they understand the policy they're going to acknowledge that. I'll get something. I'm going to do this soon.
Either way, they have to be, have to be very good.
Yeah. The executive committee meeting, we met last Wednesday on the 18th. Kathy, myself, Trish, and Matt Fuller was a guest, as we need to vote him in. Well, we don't have a quorum today, but executive. We had a couple of discussions. One was joining. He graciously agreed. In addition, we had other board member discussion. Similar to what Mike just said, Kathy has a lot of roles right now. We have 3 or 4 roles, and she just wants to step down some of them. We discussed who could take those roles on. We still have 1 board seat open, so we discussed that, and we've had a lot of great recommendations from our guests. And I don't know if you look. names are open to anyone else's.
Well, we have done that in the past, and we'll continue to take your thoughts on it, potential candidates. I think we have some, targets that I think Sue and others are trying to reach out to, but this is an ongoing process. And so we're always trying to find your. Both cases, you don't have to have I love the agenda, I just want the process to bring new names and new thoughts to that process, particularly in terms of areas that we think we need to be represented by. That kind of segues to the next thing, which is the.
Yes. So we discussed how the EDC can support small businesses. Discussed that on and off since I've been here. And how to make that a more formal program without stepping on the toes of other organizations that support small businesses. So in conjunction with them, and the idea of just being able to use your stories all the time, right? That it's difficult to know where to start, where to go, whose doors are open, how to help the EDC to be a welcoming place for any business of any size, not just large businesses that kind of area. And so putting some language around that, or it doesn't need to be a program, making sure that people know that EDC is a price business looking to move, relocate, grow, over the business here in Warren County. Then I think more will come from that. But Trish had a really great set of resources that she had created of just your supporting funds falls. Here's how you get a hold of the planning board. Here's how you get a hold of zoning. And so that's going to go on the website. And thank you. Just as kind of a first plan. Doing a quick search on where to get support from Warren County or shows up.
We're going to talk about it.
Yeah. And the executive session, that was it. And a review of the financials.
Do you have financials in your packet? The fund balance is at 5,000. Of that, 505,700 is all of that is available. None of it is invested right now. Accounts receivable, it looks a lot higher than this at this very moment. Actually, it was at 46. 105 of that was due from the county. We received 70,000 from the county, so the county making outstanding is January. And we also received 100. So now, as of today, is on 30,000. Prepaids, those are normal. It's the insurance for the year. Rent monthly gets entered as a prepaid, and website maintenance fee is also an annual expense per month. And also there's a 7% prepaid. North Country, North Country breakfast by their officers in Colonel. That's their sponsorship for 7,000. Most of that's been paid. That was toward our monthly dollars for something exceptional, except we did an office. Other current liabilities. So we moved the FSA onto the balance sheet. I don't know if you now it should not have been on the account. So that Jim and I really, it's our health insurance flex savings account. So that number will go up and down.
But it's a pure pass through.
It's a pure. Yeah.
So you won't see it on the P&L anymore. You'll see it solely on the balance sheet. Just want to understand why we moved it.
The budget.
It was in conjunction with the.
Accrued expenses, normal year-end accrued expenses, and set IRA deferrals. That's also a regular occurrence. It's because we make that transaction in February for the January. So for designated fund, there's still 30,000 there that is, if you recall, we set it aside, but it's still unassigned. That was for, the ARPA funding that we received after having already just, so reimbursement for government extension, facility study. And statement of activities, the budget in January always looks really tight. I know exactly how much because it's already been paid in 2025. So, yeah, so our January income was just short of 150,000. Income is high because there's a lot of prepaids and the prepaid memberships, and we also have the town of Queensbury, they prepare in July. Our interest gains were 890. That's from the market, and our checking budget we're behind by 500.
Any update on
Yeah, I mean, it has the trickle of questions and requests for items has really slowed down. So they were on site last week on Tuesday, I believe. Okay. You know, so all last week I got questions. They've also offered to do the LBC audit. Like that.
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, one thing that they will do an outreach to key members of the board, but some of our players, our former past chairs, no longer here. So we'll have to no, Chris.
Oh,
So we will have to figure out whether they want access to that person. I would expect that they will follow with the audit committee, they always do, and there will be a series of questions that of the staff relative to the discussions they have with key board members. That's the biggest piece, and I think that this audit group is very familiar with our relatively modest in terms of the volume of transactions and issues. And at this point, I think this is probably one of their lower audits. I do not think there's going to be any trouble getting into it.
well, you're okay with that too?
they're scheduled to. They're going to be.
All these are in
Yeah.
there.
Well, so she will come in if you would prefer her to be in person. But she works at a week.
Well, related to that, are there any forms that you need us to sign, board members to sign for the year-end video reports?
No, Kathy needs to sign something. I'm here to sign one. They will reach out. They want to reach out to Kathy first. If they can't reach Kathy, I'll do that. Okay.
Minutes? Meeting? You can't approve them, so really skip through. Jim, we're gonna skip all the way down to Jim.
Well, we've contained some things in your packet, and we'll highlight that sort of Donald. Kind of drive your meetings. You can see the business activity. Looks like it took a little bit of different. That's because we called this, and something hasn't been active for 12 months. Then we move it, and oftentimes things start at the beginning of the year. So we dropped a few things from the beginning of last year because there hadn't been significant activity. But you can see that almost immediately, despite the several going out, several came in. Are there any of note that you want to highlight?
There's a couple new ones, couple food operations that we got the small sort of categories, but
Yeah, and in fact, one right down below us.
Yeah.
You know, the old coffee shop. We have a new revival as like tender coffee. this is an ongoing thing, and I am heartened by the fact that really, whether it's from the realtors or people who are help getting a business potentially settled, or just people's own awareness, we generally get to be their first stop. They come here, they inquire with us, ask what they should do before they sign the lease or before they take any commitment and process, which is ideally where we would engage with them. I'm certain we don't know that we're getting everybody. I just know we're getting more of a flow than I remember of small businesses who literally either walk in or are brought here. So the next page, though, is something that we haven't done before. Just really, as we try to dig into what we've talked about around small business. What we wanted to do is give you some. We're trying to dig in so you have more insight to not only what is our current business page, but what are we actually. The first thing I had John do was just literally look at everything that's active and what exactly they're trying to do for them. You've seen the pie chart that's on the next page that talks about what sector is it in, where is it located, is it new or existing. This is really about what are they asking for help with. And so you can see that the small businesses, the majority of the stuff is not permitting or large, like how do I find a place and doesn't have the utilities or the constructs that I need. It's really about I've outgrown my space, or are there places that I can move to that will give me more freedom and room. This is interesting because post-COVID, this was zero. There was so much commercial space that was available. So they wanted to move readily. I think we're now reaching a place where our space, particularly for small light industrial stuff, is very constrained. Now, what's fascinating about this is this week we got a inquiry from a developer who has already built small warehouses on spec in the parts of the capital district who's interested in doing that here. Joe Rose has been doing that on his properties just on the other side of Exit 18 for some time. He builds a building, maybe 50,000 square feet, breaks it up into 3 or 4 segments, and then markets each one of those. But the fact that there are other developers looking to come here to do this, which reflects exactly what we're seeing, which is the need for more businesses to have more space. The funding stuff is not just traditional CFA. Sometimes they're coming to us trying to figure out which is the better path for them to go. Should they go for SBA down that path, or should they go through one of the organizations like the EDC? Maybe they should follow the two. We have really probably the best relationships I've ever seen in my tenure here with all of those entities. So Pursuit sends people to us, we send people to Pursuit. That's the SBA lender of choice here. The relationship between things like the Lake George Regional Planning Board and RLDC and other funding entities are oftentimes referring them to each other. But there's a significant amount of that. Sometimes people just come in trying to figure out, could I do this? I'm also heartened by this. This is the work that Bob and I do all the time with new startups who start at ADK. But when somebody who's already got an existing business is looking for help understanding either the market or whether or not they should do something, so oftentimes we can help them, like maybe advising them not to do something. And it sounds a little counterintuitive, but I remember 2 meetings in the last month where the direction they were going is not something I would have felt comfortable advising them to do. We're not going to blindly tell somebody, at least we believe that that's going to overwhelm their business. And fixed cost in an environment where their cash flows move is oftentimes kills businesses at scale. And so what we do is just highlight other alternatives for them. We don't make that choice for them, but we simply try to make sure they understand the various paths that they can have. It's getting to the point now where maybe 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 of the inquiries is like that. And I think this is an area that we marketed the fact that we do this, we made this more evident. I think we would see even more of it. There are times when people look for us to go help them navigate the process. Sometimes it's vague. Like we sit alongside of the potential development in West Mountain that's nearly $200 million. That's been working its way through that process for the last years in Queensborough. We go to many of those public meetings as not only a supporter, but oftentimes as somebody who can help answer questions that come up. Yeah, but crew in the city is another one. But sometimes they're small entities. They're just simply trying to figure out where do I go and how do I do this. So this is kind of bipolar in terms of the size. Infrastructure is its own small thing, and oftentimes if infrastructure is required, that's a big long way. And this oftentimes informs our efforts around larger infrastructure grants and planning at the county as well. This is just our first attempt for all of you on the board to try to bring more insight. I think as we tried specifically to broaden our appeal to businesses of all sizes, I'd like to bring in some additional measures here. What's the age of the organization? What's the size of the organization? How many of them are, for instance, associated with in specific efforts like the ERI here on South Street, so that we can identify segments of activity that are part of the leverage that's here. We've had a lot of work before starting. The pie charts are there for you, but they continue to say the same things. 2/3 of what we do is for existing businesses that we see. Most of the new things have some real estate component to them. Anytime you see the small numbers, that's probably going to be one or two. But this manufacturing thing holds. I was expecting this to not continue to operate there. That is the rough equivalent of what manufacturing is in our economy. It's between 10 and 15%, depending on how you look at it. And the fact that we continue to see activity that is essentially that same thing means that we are not seeing a decline, we're seeing a shift in the manufacturing sector. As some elements either decline or go away, other elements in the same space are moving in. You see that oftentimes. Liza gave an outbrief about her work with the angio component that was reaching the end of their employment period as a result of that long announcement a year ago. That most of those people who have an intent to continue to work, the issue was whether angio could keep them through their period of employment. It wasn't that they didn't have a place to go. And this data continues to show that we are not declining in terms of net interest around that space. It's not going to ever be the dominant part of our economy, but it continues to hold as a significant part. I think the question is, now that we're deep into the grant world, we have to provide you with updates on this because this is not something that we have spent a lot of time in the last 5 years. There are 4 major grant activities going on, and I want to make sure you know where we are on each one of them. On the Connect All, which is the broadband grant, where we're looking to put a cellular overlay, which the design is to put a cellular overlay over the city center of Glens Falls, from the civic center through the central business district, including areas that move towards the east end and all the way to South Street. Essentially, you can think of it as the ERI original area. That grant, and also in Lake George Village, and there's a third component of that, which is a mobile cellular unit that would be deployable by the county, where they could use that resource for events or even in some cases emergencies to be able to extend the cell network, their coverage or the capacity is a problem. You can think of like a balloon festival. So yeah, those are the 3 components of this. What we've already been awarded this, and what awarded means is your application has been accepted. It does not mean that we have received the money, and it does not mean that we have made the commitment. It means that we are now eligible to enter the next phase, which is a negotiation on the incentive agreement. Now, the challenge with all of these is, I shouldn't say all, but most of these are reimbursable grants, which means that you have to go pay for whatever it is and then go through the process of getting it back. This is not a position where we have the reserves to be able to do this on behalf of any of the municipalities. You know what our position is. We don't have millions of dollars of flow. So essentially what we do is work with the municipalities to say, these agreements will require that you essentially what we do is vet the work. If a vendor does the work and we can validate that they've done the work, we approve that invoice for payment, and then we go to the municipality for their component and say, you now need to discharge this amount of money. And roughly, it's not exactly this, but you can think of this grant as a third, a third, a third between the city of Glens Falls, New George, and the county. So we would then issue requests for payment from them. They would then, we would collect those checks. We would then make one payment to the vendor, and then we would begin the process of seeking reimbursement from the state. On this particular type of grant, if the grant operates, it's something like 6 to 9 months, because it's a much more straightforward thing. There's not a lot of procurement activity that has to be validated, and this is something that's a relatively small dollar amount relative to some of their other things. But there is a timeline there, and essentially that then means when we get the reimbursement back from ESD, we then reallocate that back to the individual players. So we have to go get agreement from them that they would set aside those funds to allow that to occur. In the election in Glens Falls, that represents a new wrinkle in this, because the agreement that we had made with Bill, now still former mayor, now has to be something that the new administration agrees to. We're in that process right now. I don't know how that will go. Let's see. Well, it's somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000, and we're trying at any one time of exposure
Total or?
for a particular year. So this is a slightly less than $2 million grant over 2 years, and so break that into thirds. It's somewhere around $300,000 a year on average, but there's a peak and valley, and the expenditures might be as high as $400,000 or $500,000. The city of Glens Falls is the greatest concentration of assets, right? Even though they're 1/3 players, in terms of the number of assets that we have to put in downtown, it's significantly more than it. So I think it's somewhere in that $300,000 to $400,000 category. We're trying to set up a meeting with the mayor to go through this in detail. John's trying to do that now. Probably by the next meeting that we have with you, we will have clarity about where the city. Maybe they may not have acted, but they will have expressed what they want to do. If they don't want to move forward with this, then we will have to sit down with the state to see whether or not we can either drop their componentry out and just shrink down to another 2, or whether the whole thing doesn't move forward.
Unfortunately, I maybe you already know this, but there's been huge delays in the city of North reimbursing the city of Glens Falls on the DRI. And I would assume that they would have delays on this as well. They're not very efficient in terms of making those reimbursements.
I understand the reticence. It's a completely different flow.
Same agency.
It is, but it's the broadband offices within it. It's a little bit like NYSERDA versus ESD. I'm not in any way trying to defend it. It is a slow moving process. It's just a slightly more efficient, slow moving process. We have the data that says of the last 3 or 4 grants like this that a community that we're working with has been involved with, you know, what the payment schedule has been like. And we're going to reflect that data, and we'll see where this is.
So, understanding service administrator, you say we're going to be responsible for not checking on the bird.
Yeah,
I've seen that there's more bars in certain places.
yeah. I mean, essentially, we are the vendor would be the one that is reporting to us as the administrator. It's up to us to determine whether we want a third party to go manage that. In this particular case, between John and I feel like the last 5 years of work we've done on broadband, and the work that I've done in telecommunications is sufficient to see whether or not they put in wireless nodes. That's really all this is, essentially a giant wireless network to the city of Falls. The question of whether or not it's effective or how well it works, that's not the issue. This is a pilot program that's designed to drop this equipment in and see whether or not it has a positive social impact. Does this produce more sales tax? Does this produce more? Does the traffic flow over to? That's really what they're after, is to figure out whether overlay networks like this actually work. And so it's binary for us. Is the equipment been installed and is it operating? I think that's a fairly low risk. I have to tell you, on another grant, I'm nervous about this. This one I'm not. It's a finite number of places we can see whether or not it's been installed. On the next one, which is the child care, with Kelly with this, but there's a grant that came to us not because we asked for it, it came to us because there's a tremendous amount of interest in child care in the state. Right? Big wave of money and discussion at the state level, which has been driven from the city out. There's the Rockefeller Family Fund has representatives that are living here at least part time out of the year, work that they can get involved with. They were aware of that. They came to us and said, we would like to try something very novel here. We would like to bring some of our money in, try to prepare the Adirondacks ahead of this push of money to develop proposals that would actually work in our very unpopulated, hard to serve areas. And would you be the one who orchestrates this by bringing voice of business, employers, business, to the discussion that already exists about existing of child care part. Now, this is about the 92% of the county that is on the other side of the line. It also highlights the fact that there is no entity like us in the park. So what they're after is for us to essentially grab the businesses together, to get their input in a structured way, and to have the consultant that would be paid for under this grant work under the roof here. So that we would drive their activity, we would help them set up their engagements. In North Creek is probably the first node at which we would do this. And a lot of that is based on the work we've done to try to engage that community around their infrastructure and their development. So this is a place where this is a logical next step for that community. That community is eager to try to do something with child care as a result of the new development that's occurring here. So all the pieces came together, but it's not something I would have sought. If I were trying to figure out what are the more impactful things we should do next, continue to do, is probably around housing. It's probably even more of a broadband that we're doing. But if there is going to be billions of dollars that get spent on expanding child care in the state, we want to make sure that the Adirondacks are not locked out of it. And we also want to make sure that the voice of business is sharing. So I was heartened that they asked us to do it, but it's unusual for us. We've posted the position. There's more than 15 people now that have applied. They're all over the map in terms of some of them are very deep in their child care, some of them are very deep in their community engagement. I don't know which one will eventually pick, but they'll sit out of here and we will help them organize their events. But we very much like the work that we've already been doing around housing and broadband in the rural parts of our county, and even into parts of the court that go beyond our county lines. But this one is probably the one that I see most straightforward. Our role is simply like the pass through on the paying the contractor, that they'll be paid directly by the Adirondack Community Foundation. We're not even involved in that club. They work at our direction, but they're paid by the grant. Our role is intervening groups of people that are already part of it. The Power Up grant is the one I'm worried about, Paul. This is the grant to try to bring an additional high capacity, high voltage power secondary source to the Hudson River Glen. It essentially would require putting a new station near where the Lehigh Quarry is in northern Saratoga County that would be able to receive high capacity power from the eastern side where the new line coming down from Quebec is going in. And that would provide a reverse flow from the Spire Falls high capacity line, which is coming from 18 miles to the west. That exposure of 18 miles is significant to anybody that's in that area. And in the last year, has experienced a number of power outages. So it certainly affects Finch, but it affects anybody who has a high capacity power that is on that corridor. So anybody that's on the Saratoga County line, or the Essity site, and any other high capacity users that are in that proximity, and areas that go beyond even Glens Falls, into Queensbury, and potentially even Washington County, that are on the northern side of the Hudson River. This work is not particularly hard when it comes to power, but we are not power. We don't do a lot of power grants. We're working with National Grid. I think they know what they need to do. It's one power station and 5 poles. But in terms of overseeing that work, to make sure that it's done well, I don't know whether we need a third party or not. I'm trying to explore that. It may be that we need an engineering partner who can help us with it. The other thing we got to do is figure out the financing on this one, just like we do the others. I mean, this is probably a $5 or $6 million effort. We don't have $5 or $6 million to put up and have it be reimbursed. So we got to work with the various stakeholders to see whether or not that can be generated externally. And we're in the process of doing that. SEDC has agreed to be a partner in this, but I don't know that they've made a funding commitment. They simply said that we stand to benefit on our side of the river from this. I've engaged the city, Judy, I've talked to her about this, so she understands what we're doing. I haven't asked her specifically for funding. Simply told her that this is an effort that we have underway and would benefit not only the businesses that are in the city that are there, but also the city itself, because the wastewater treatment plant would essentially be a beneficiary, even if they don't have the need for it now, future-proofs the site so that they could. And I'm certain that they will experience growth over the next 50 years around that plant. So that's where we stand on this one. I don't know exactly what it's going to take in order for us to do this. We're working very aggressively on this. I think we know what needs to be done. Now we got to go figure out the model under which it could be executed. And for your benefit, we try to keep up to date on this, but at any point that he wants to talk more about this, we always can. The freshwater center is this idea. We got to start following this the direction that I'm taking. I had the group of Marty Schmidt, the president of RPI, John Kelly, former IBM guy who's also the board chair of the LGA, and RPI, the father of the Jefferson Project, and Brandon Wiltsey, who's the leader of the LGA. That's everybody. I finally got them back together, hard to schedule, high-powered people. But the consensus here was that the discussion about a building or a center has essentially distracted people from what is the real focus, which is to add economic development to the already existing areas of science and education around freshwater protection. And their direction to me was that we need to rebrand this effort so that it does not connotate construction of a building, at least not initially, but is rather the investment in how do we grow the ecosystem of businesses and enterprise around this to add to the surface area that already exists. And that's why we're the logical leader for it. Empire State Development has contacted us to say that we will be eligible for one of their study grants and actually urged us to apply, because for the state, in order to come to funding, that's the vehicle they like to do it, is a study that essentially guides what should be the approach objectively. So that's the next step. We're likely to apply for a startup grant. The question is really the composition. Do we do this on our own? Or do we do this in partnership with those various entities? They have a funding role, or do they simply have a participatory role? That's the part that we're working on now. I would expect that what this will lead to is maybe a study that is valued somewhere in the $50,000 to $100,000 area. We would oversee that. I don't really think that's dramatically different. And it would essentially then inform what would be our future plan and ask around investment. But one thing that is clear, everyone agrees that we should be advocating with the state. Natural resource protection should be its own economic development cluster. It should receive some level of investment funding. We're unified around that. Exactly how that takes place in all time. There's some highlights in the rest of the deck here about the budget. I don't want to go through this in detail with you, but there's a lot in the budget that we wanted to at least bring to your attention. John actually did an analysis that says, based on this budget, together with AI and our discussions with others, what does this mean for us? To net this all out, we are well positioned here. We are typically either aligned or ahead of where the state and the money is flowing. We are not missing any part of this. Like, there's not some component that the state is engaged in that we're not participating in. But for instance, if we hadn't been engaged in this child care area, that would be a place where there is significant investment going on from the state, but that we didn't have an approach. I'm pleased to say that right now, our strategy is essentially aligned with what the state is funding and with their focus. next page, John, is literally, and this is deep, but we're constantly looking at where are we in terms of this. And this essentially provides you with some much more detail about how do we look relative to not only the rest of the state or our region, but just everything. And you won't be surprised to know that we look old. But not particularly out of touch with many other places. And relative to those other places where the workforce is challenged, our economy is operating at a much greater rate. Jeff gave a very, I thought, effective presentation to the county yesterday, Judy, about that MSA study that I showed you previously. And he went deep on that. He went and explained to them all of the parts of the 20 measures that went into the relative ranking of economic strength and why it was that we were doing so well relative to that our workforce continues to shrink. But there's a point at which productivity can no longer work. And the message that Jeff had and that this chart should tell you is that we can't possibly have a sustainable economy if we do not work actively to repopulate. We've got to reduce our median age. And it's not because we don't like people that are old like me. It's because 20 years from now, there won't be enough people to sustain the economy that we have, which is why we focus on housing. It's not because we like developers, although we have many developers who are members. It's because if we don't figure out how to bring more people to bear here, our healthcare sector won't function the way that it does today. The interesting that underlies this is the Wall Street Journal article that essentially shows that the healthcare economy is holding up the entire U.S. economy. It's the only area with net economic workforce growth. That shows that what we're doing here is aligned with the rest of the additional states. The last page I just want to share with you. I don't know how many Newmark, who is supervisor in Johnsburg, deeply engaged with Mark over two of his administrations because of our work around sewer and North Creek. He was also a board member of EDC, served on our business review committee. He was actively involved in economic development, not only in his town, but in the entire region, served on the FDA board as well. Passed away suddenly in January. I actually went to this funeral ceremony that week, but they're having a celebration of life in North Creek. The new Ski Bowl Lodge, which Mark was so excited about. Part of his entire campaign that he worked in was to try to ensure that the town saw that grew successfully. Any of you who can, I would encourage you to join us because I think this is a celebration of something that we did with a new partner. Unfortunately, it's not sure, but we're just beginning to see the real benefit of it. And to have it there, I think. But tomorrow night, I think, celebration of the new Ski Bowl.
Correct. So. What do you think? Okay, I guess it is 8:58 and no one can go on that. So thank you all for coming. Our next meeting is our annual meeting, so we'll put all these resolutions up today next month. On favor of
Okay. Actually, first day.
I just make sure you go. Thank you.